Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Community and Environment Scrutiny panel. We will do introductions, but firstly, let's do a bit of housekeeping. So, for fire alarm, a fire practice is not expected, but if the alarm sounds, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by the way of the nearest exit. Designated, designated assembly point is in the public square in front of the cast, beyond the fountain and away from the civic office. No roll call will be undertaken. If there is anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. Please can I ask for everyone to ensure their mobile phones is switched to silent mode, please. Filming of this meeting will be audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Can I ask those present to use their microphones to ensure the audio will be captured? And if there are any members of the public entering their chamber, we ask that they accept their images will be retained, but I don't think we have anyone from the public today. So we'll move on to the agenda, but firstly I will do brief introductions for the panel. So I'll go first. I'm Gemma Cobby, I'm the Chair for Communities Environment.
Nigel Cannings, Vice Chair.
Councillor Emma Muddyman-Rawlins.
Councillor Amy Dixon.
Councillor Steve Cox, Finley Ward.
Councillor David Nevitt, Edenthorpe and Kirksandall Ward.
Thank you very much. We'll do the officers in a second if we go through the agenda. So as far as I'm aware, we have no apologies for absence. Okay. And for the committee to consider the extent which public and press are excluded from the meeting. Are we aware of any? No. Declarations of interest. Have we got any declarations of interest? If not, please can you contact Caroline after the meeting and Caroline will sort that for you. And as far as I'm aware, there's no public statements. Okay. Can we just check through the minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of January 2023, which feels a very much long time ago. So if we can go through the notes, and can we agree to agree these and be seconded? Okay, thank you. So if we move on to the Crime and Safety Community Update Report, which is on pages 9 to 16 in your pack. There is a presentation, but what I'll ask now is for the officers for this panel to introduce themselves. So if I move over to Dan, if you'd be the first to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair. Dan Swain, Director for Police, Doncaster City Council.
Morning, Chair and colleagues. Bill Hotchkiss, Head of Community Safety and Doncaster City Centre.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chief Superintendent Ian Profit. I'm the Borough Commander and I chair the Community Safety Partnership Exec Board.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rachel Long, Crime and Community Safety Manager.
Thank you. And just to I think James Church has joined us as well, so welcome, James. If I can move over to the presentation, as I understand there is a presentation. Sorry, have you got a presentation for us, Rachel? Yes. Okay.
Just by way of introduction, Chair, the presentation is going to be myself and Ian Profit going through the various slides, and the request to us was to give an overview of the way that we manage crime and reoffending in Doncaster, and obviously a lot of that is managed through the Safer, Stronger Doncaster Partnership, and there's a particular focus on retail crime as well, which I think scrutiny panel members will find quite interesting in terms of the update. So two parts to it. Ian's going to start off because a lot of the focus is around police activity, crime data, and then I'm going to pick up at the latter part of the presentation with some slides relating to the theme group and also an update around the PSPO. So thanks, Chair. I'll just pass over to Ian.
Okay, next slide, please. So, Doncaster's seen an overall increase in reported crime during the period, and this is September 2022 to August 2023. It's an increase of around 1.2%. It's actually not necessarily out of step with the rest of the county. The rest of the force is around 2.1% and is generally in keeping with crime trends across the country. Reported crime in our borough increased across the first 6 months of the year, except for November, with crime seeing a decrease each month during the second half of the period. And the table at the bottom of the slide illustrates there the reductions in crime in green with a percentage rate that shows those reductions And I think it's worthy of note because they tend to be periods of time when actually we see increases through the spring and the summer. Doncaster's total crime equates to around 26.8% of all crime in South Yorkshire. Again, that's in keeping with the size of the borough. Sheffield's borough has around 38.8% of all recorded crime. So it gives us some reassurance that at least we're not out of kilter in terms of the size of our area and the size of our population. In the last year, Doncaster has seen some variation across crime types. Increases of less than 10% have been seen in drugs use, crimes, possession of weapons and sexual offences. The most significant increases, however, in theft and robbery, which is what we're going to talk about a bit today. These have increased by 19 and 21% respectively. Shoplifting itself, which is a category within the wider theft category, has increased by 45%, and business robberies by 173%. I'm just going to give you some context around that. Both are indications potentially of the current cost of living crisis, and perhaps the use of robbery is an indication of the measures that people will take in order to commit what have previously been relatively low-level crimes. Business burglaries have increased by 7%, and I'm just going to also give you some context around, or Bill will, around the context in dwelling burglaries and some reductions we've seen that contrast that. Next slide, please. So just focus a little bit on acquisitive crime. So during this period, our increase has been around 6.8% in acquisitive crime. Acquisitive crime are basically theft-related offences. They include offences such as burglary, robbery, all variety of thefts, including shoplifting. Doncaster accounts again for about 27% of all of South Yorkshire's total acquisitive crime. So again, that's in keeping. We look at the trends around overall crime. And Sheffield, for example, accounts for 41% of all recorded acquisitive crimes. So again, some comfort that we are not out of kilter in terms of the size of our geography and populations. So as we've already mentioned, the largest increases have been in sort of business robbery and shoplifting. And we've also seen some aggravated vehicle taking increases, and that's basically a theft of a vehicle that then results in damage to that vehicle or street furniture or another vehicle. So these vehicles that are stolen and crashed often while they're being pursued by police, or the owner, once recovered, finds that the vehicle's been damaged, perhaps by crashing into street furniture. In terms of business robberies, they're actually recorded in relatively low numbers. Incidents predominantly are found in the town ward, as you can imagine, because that's where majority of our sort of retail businesses are. And those business robberies, around 79 throughout the year. So 40 of those were in the central, 18 in north and east, and 21 in Doncaster west. Now, there are some crime recording rules that mean that we record incidents as a business robbery, and quite understandably, I think if people think about business robbery, they assume that this is where members of staff are held at sort of gunpoint or knife point. Not always the case, of course. We still see those old style robberies, but actually in terms of crime recording, these are often shopliftings where there is a threat to or use of force on the staff that work in the premises. And the examples that are kind of given as a difference between a shoplifter who picks up an item and conceals them and leaves the store without payment versus a shoplifter who might throw other products, and that happens towards members of staff who've seen them do it. The latter would still count as a robbery because there is a threat of force or use of force, even though that is an inanimate object that's been thrown in the direction of that member of staff. So this is about us recording properly crimes for what they are. We are confident that there is no specific increase in business robberies. We don't have a trend, and we're quite good at picking up on these with individuals who are systematically committing robberies on sort of financial premises or as it used to be, garages where cigarettes were stolen in large numbers, where in effect the staff are held up with use of a weapon. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a focus on some of the shoplifting, and I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing to sort of address it. So between 1st of August 22 and 31st of July 23, and 22 retail shopliftings recorded in Doncaster. This is quite a big increase compared to the previous year, and as I've said, this is in keeping with what's happening in the rest of the county, the rest of the region, and nationally. However, over the last few months, we have seen quite a steep increase in Doncaster that's still quite concerning. Of those, we are identifying suspects in about 76% of cases. Top wards for retail shopliftings, as you imagine, were town, with 43% of all of those crimes taking place in town. And at the moment, a lot of our focus is beginning to be on that town ward. We see offenders that commit offences in town ward also commit offences in the other areas. In the PSPO area, retail shopliftings increased by just 3%, though, so some context there about the use of that power. Another issue that's on the rise, and I've already touched on that, is harassment type offences, which is where there is unpleasant or confrontational behaviour with the staff. And I think we've perhaps seen a bit of a step change in the last 12 months, where ordinarily, if a shoplifter is disturbed or interrupted by a member of staff, they'd make their way off and run away. Well, actually, what we're seeing is people that are then confronting those shop members and continuing to follow through with the theft. Next slide, please. This slide speaks a bit more to some of the work we're doing with our Crime Recording Bureau to make sure that we're recording those accurately. I would imagine that this is probably a subject in terms of crime recording standards that's usually pretty dull for people to listen to, but it's something that we are measured on by the inspection regime that we have in the police service to ensure that we have consistent crime recording across the country, which does then allow us to be compared and contrasted in terms of trends with other areas. So there's an awful lot of work that goes into that crime recording, hence the changes in that percentage rise of robberies. I think probably, if I'm honest, 3 or 4 years ago, they'd have all just been recorded as shopliftings. So positive outcome for commercial robberies, currently at 27% of all offences are detected. We have a retail crime lead for the force and for our local area. That's Chief Inspector Dave Strubbles, who works with Chief Inspector Joe Hunt, who's our neighbourhood policing Chief Inspector. And they've pulled together some work, and we have a plan to address the rise in shoplifting. We work with probation on our cohort of shoplifters. The majority of our shoplifting cohort are individuals that are already known to the criminal justice system. And I think, frankly, we see a revolving door through courts and through prison for individuals that then return to communities and continue those kind of activities, because the crime chosen is often driven by other need, whether that's substance misuse or homelessness or other vulnerabilities. We work well with probation around these cohorts, and within the pack that you've hopefully already had time to read, we talk about the different cohorts that we have of offender management. So fixed, flex and free cohorts. And the fixed cohort is one that is stipulated that we have to have certain types of offenders that are within that group. But our flex cohort allows us to put other individuals, other crime types within those groups. And I know that through the Community Safety Partnership, and certainly on a personal level, we have really good relationships with lead people within probation. So we have agreements locally to have some of our shoplifters and our prolific shoplifters within that integrated offender management cohort. That's not always the case. Hasn't always been the case in policing, and isn't always the case in other parts of the country. So for us to be able to bring all of those other diversion and support networks that integrated offender management framework brings us is something that's welcome. And over the last few months, we have started to power that up. If you move on to the final slide, I'll just actually talk through really what this does, ladies and gents, is just kind of give you the illustration of what I've described to you. The graph in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen with the green line indicates a gradual increase in shoplifting since 2021. debatable whether how much of that is impacted by the end of COVID, but certainly the cost of living crisis seems to consistently be an issue around some of those increases. But you will note that through the summer of this year, despite having reductions in overall crime throughout the summer in the borough, that sharp increase in theft shoplifting is something that we've recognised and are starting to respond to. So what are we doing? Certainly in terms of the town ward, theft shoplifting is something that we believe should be owned by our neighbourhood team. Long gone are the days where we set up a separate shoplifting squad. I've been quite frank, I think, in some of the communications that I've had with people from, for example, the Chamber of Commerce or retail crime, is that we probably haven't given business crime the attention as a wider police service that it's needed over the last few years. And I think quite understandably, policing has to bring focus to other vulnerabilities. And I think actually when you speak to business leaders and retailers, they understand that, is that if we have high-risk missing people, serious sexual offending, most serious violence offences and issues such as knives crime to address, they understand that they don't necessarily come top of that priority list when we manage our demands. But nonetheless, we need to respond better. So these are neighbourhood crime issues for neighbourhood teams who are locally based that can understand the challenges that arise from certain retail premises and understand the offending cohort and the reasons for their offending. What we're doing at the moment is bringing that focus back to the city centre. That's not to the detriment of the other areas who still have neighbourhood teams. But if 43% of our shoplifting offences are within the town ward, and actually more specifically, one small part of that, which we refer to as Alpha Alpha 4, one of our little boundaries, we need to get on top of that. So we are putting some extra staff into the central neighbourhood team. They're not being moved from other neighbourhood teams. Those neighbourhood teams will stay as they are. We've had some challenging conversations internally about where we bring those staff from at the moment. They're having to move across from our response function as we start to see some of our student officers arrive into the district. So that increases the capability in our central neighbourhood team. And with the teams that work, the NRT with the local authority and the city centre ambassadors, we are building a patrol plan and joint working. That means that we continue to be joined up. And we saw that how effectively we can work together when we dealt with some challenges around ASB in the French Gate Centre some 18 months ago. These are different challenges that we face now, but actually there is a cohort of individuals who continue to cause some problems in the city centre that we are dealing with. In terms of theft shoplifting, we've put some of our staff who are no longer able because of injury to be deployed in operational duties. They're now working as a retail crime coordination team, and they're helping to join the dots between offenders and offences. That's already starting to work. On Friday of last week, we had 4 shoplifters who've been out causing some challenge across different parts of our borough who were arrested, 2 of whom are responsible for 28 offences between them alone. One of whom has already been recalled for prison and one who went to court. We continued that on Monday with another suspect who alone was arrested for 28 offences around the borough over a short 2-week period. They've been charged with 20 of those offences. They take a bit of work. They're often CCTV based, so that coordination team will help us to bring those investigations to a point of prosecution sooner. We have the support from funding through the GRIP patrols and Civitas, which are actually ASB and MSV operations. Those operations put extra staff into our high output areas at key times. We've already got those in place in the district, and that is helping with some of our visibility patrols. And we're taking a problem-solving approach to some of the retail outlets that have persistent offences. And there's a balance, to be honest. Some of our retailers are large multinational companies who have a better capacity to prevent crime from taking place within their premises. And then you contrast that to some of the smaller retail premises that might need a bit more help and guidance. And some of those challenges around the availability and accessibility of their CCTV networks, some of their systems are quite old. we're moving to a system that I think I briefed you on before called DAMS, which allows retailers to upload into the cloud their CCTV quickly. We're trying to move away from the days where we have to send someone out to travel, the travelling time, to then go and burn CCTV onto a disk or to a hard drive and then find the right software that will allow it to play on our systems and the court process. If the retailers can upload it straight away, our coordination team can sit remotely and join the dots between offences and link offences. We've seen that with those two examples I've just given you, where we have multiple offences linked up quite quickly. That stops a series and means that we can get people through a criminal justice process and through that diversion work quicker. Some of our smaller retailers aren't equipped to do that yet, and actually have no means to upload their CCTV onto those systems. So Dave Struggles, our chief inspector, one of his part of his improvement plan is to work with the chamber to see how we can start to improve some of those systems for people. I'm sure you'll appreciate we're not necessarily in a position to start giving public money to retailers to put their CCTV right, but we are working with our Design Act crime officers and our neighbourhood officers to try and help them, give them practical crime prevention advice around their premises. Bill, I'll hand on to you for the next stage.
Thank you, Ian. Give your voice a rest. In terms of the next slide we're talking about is the work of the crime and reoffending theme group. And as Ian described, under the SSDP, we've got a number of theme groups: antisocial behaviour, serious and organised crime, domestic and sexual abuse. But the one we're going to focus on today is the crime and reoffending theme group. That's a group that's chaired by Ian's crime manager and jointly chaired by the lead for probation. So the lead for probation also manages the integrated offender management model and has a key part in that. So having the two individuals as partners chairing that group is a real strength, and that's something that's unique to Doncaster. The group's got a clear delivery plan and reports on a bi-monthly basis to the SSDP, which Ian chairs, and that provides a report around the activity that's taking place around crime and reoffending. So the acquisitive crime, theft, burglary, theft from vehicle, robberies, that's the focus of that group. And again, it's a partnership, so it's got key partners around the table that's looking at approaches around early interventions and preventions, and also some enforcement approaches as well. The IOM scheme in Doncaster incorporates shoplifters, retail crime offenders, as Ian highlighted earlier, and the flex cohort, which I know is one of the questions that comes later, that gives the ability and flexibility for us to locally determine offenders that should fit within that cohort. And actually in Doncaster, we've determined that retail crime offenders are the cohort that we want to focus on, because not only they're causing issues around retail crime, but also causing other issues, particularly in the city centre around antisocial behaviour, aggressive begging, etc. So in terms of the city centre POP plans, that stands for problem-oriented policing plans. So although it's around policing, there's very much a partnership approach to that as well. So we will be involved, as Ian describes, around the enforcement and offender management. In terms of some of the retail crime issues in the city, our team work very closely with the police. So, for example, the city centre engagement officers that patrol the city centre, we're looking at joint patrols going forward because the additional resources that Ian's highlighted. And I've got a meeting tomorrow with Inspector Lisa Bird to go through that in more detail. We thrive on intelligence, so the submission of intelligence around the offenders, who's doing what, whose names been mentioned in relation to retail crime. An important thing as well is thinking about the distribution outlets for stolen property. So, for example, if somebody steals an item in the city centre, they will want to dispose of it. So they'll either want to sell it on, there could be other retailers that's buying things from them, it could be in some of the city centre pubs where things are being bought. We know that's happening, so understanding that distribution method for stolen property is another outlet for us in terms of tackling the issue. So that's something we're looking at as well. So that's about intelligence sharing. So the whole focus is around that partnership effort, because tackling retail crime is not just an issue for the police, it's an issue for us as well, because we want to ensure that city centre thrives, we want to attract new businesses. We've got some really good links with the new French Gate Centre manager, a lady called Corinne Mycock, who's come from a big major retail shopping centre in Leeds and has come to Doncaster. Got some fabulous links with Corinne already, and she's met Lisa, met myself, and a lot of the city centre team. We've got a very good network working at the moment in terms of sharing information and problem solving. So that's something that's working really, really well. Ian's touched upon the launch of the new system to capture CCTV evidence. So this is CCTV evidence from retailers and businesses who can pass that on fairly securely and remotely to the police. It helps everyone. It saves police officers having to attend at shops and collect CCTV evidence because it can be transferred electronically. So it's a major step forward. As well, what we need to understand is in the city centre, we are very lucky to have a great CCTV system. And that system is monitored 24/7. And again, there's some excellent links between our CCTV camera network, the monitoring that takes place, and actions that are developed from that. And only a couple of days ago, we had a fabulous result with an individual involved in drug dealing in the city centre, who was followed by the police onto North Bridge, disposed of a package and was arrested. Fabulous result, started from CCTV by somebody observing suspicious behaviour. So what I want to do is really work together with the police in terms of coordinating all that effort in the city centre to deal with retail crime. And obviously that's going to have a knock-on effect for other areas of Doncaster, because as Ian mentioned in his report, it's not just an issue affecting the city centre, it's affecting other local areas in Doncaster. So we can't ignore that. We need to make sure that support's there as well. And that'll be driven through the Crime and Reoffending Theme Group. So working alongside prison colleagues, the Crime and Reoffending Group have a new continuity of care regional referral form. And that's about individuals who are in prison who may have particular complex needs. And it ensures there's some synergy between the treatment that's taking place in prison that then continues outside through our healthcare systems and local partners such as Aspire. So that's a really good individual response in relation to people leaving prison. Operation Castle. Ian touched upon the fact that the police obviously are very conscious of reported burglaries within Doncaster. So Operation Castle has been a specialist operation that was set up in April this year and involves a coordinated, trained group of officers specialised in investigation of burglaries. And part of that will relate to the investigation, part of it will relate to offender management, and some of it will also be about the deployment of highly visible resources in areas affected by burglary. Operation Castle targets home burglars, but equally there's a significant crossover with other offenders, particularly people involved in retail crime and other offence types. So what we do find is sometimes when somebody's arrested for a burglary, they've also been involved in other types of crime, stealing from vehicles, etc., etc. Now, the great news about Operation Castle, and some figures that we've just received recently, actually, in Doncaster, burglary dwellings are down 6%. Now, that may not seem a high number. However, when we compare that with other areas of South Yorkshire, Barnsley's seen an increase of 18%, Rotherham an increase of 31%, and Sheffield an increase of 9%. So I think a 6% decrease in burglary through the work of the officers that's involved in Operation Castle is certainly something to celebrate. So that's an excellent result there. And I think shows, again, coordinated effort, intensive effort in relation to some particular problems around burglary, and that's something we want to do in a similar vein in relation to retail crime as well. Next slide, please, Rachel. City Centre Public Space Protection Order. I've been involved with this for the last 3 months, but finally we're starting to see that the PSPO has now reached a stage where it's been formally agreed by Cabinet, and it will be implemented on the 7th of November. So just some headlines from the PSPO work. It's one element of a partnership approach to managing ASB in the city centre. What I've said as part of the presentation is that it certainly helps to manage ASB in the city centre. Without it, it would be a key risk for us, really, as an organisation, as a partnership. So it's one part of a whole range of portfolios to tackle ASB, but certainly is an important part. We had a very good consultation. I know people in the room will have heard this before, so apologies for repeating it. But, more than double the responses we had in 2020. And that's because we ran a really successful and proactive campaign, engaging businesses, engaging the public, using all means at our disposal, and some great support from our communications team as well. In terms of the results we got back, overall, extremely strong support. Over 90% of people wanted to retain the PSPO in its current form with the 7 prohibitions. So a really good response from the public there. As part of the PSPO consultation, we pulled together some figures in relation to what's occurred between 2020 and March 2023. And we found that there was over 1,100 breaches of the PSPO, and as a result of that, 86 fixed penalty notices were issued. Some people would say that doesn't seem a big outcome in terms of fixed penalties, but the PSPO is not just about enforcement. It's about engagement, it's about support, it's about working with people that's got complex needs and providing them with that support. And that's something that will continue into the next PSPO as well. One of the points that came out from the public, and is something that we need to listen to, is that they want to see issues around behaviours addressed, but want to see those affected by homelessness, addiction, and any associated issues, provided that effective support. So again, that's something we need to recognise, that people are concerned about some of the behaviours they see in the city centre. Some of the behaviours that Ian's touched upon in relation to retail crime, where we're finding that people who are caught shoplifting, sometimes will walk out the door very quietly, or used to, but not anymore. They seem to want to confront and be aggressive. Well, that's the aggressive behaviour that I think some of the public are seeing, and that's something we want to address as well, and we will do going forward. Next slide, please, Rachel. So just in summary, our strategy reflects the priorities of the Safer, Stronger Doncaster Partnership. As we say, we have seen an overall increase in reported crime during that period, but I think what you've heard from Ian is that we are responding to that, and we have recognised that. We want to make sure we put resources into the areas that where those increases have been seen. Good examples are around the new approach to retail crime, and also the Op Castle work as well in relation to targeting burglaries. As we said, the most significant increases have been around thefts and robberies, and the percentages are there for people to see. But there's an explanation about the robberies. The 173% increase in business robberies seems to be, a massive increase, but Ian's put some context to that in terms of an explanation as to why that's occurred. We've seen an overall increase in reported acquisitive crime, and that's recognised as well. And in terms of recent reoffending data, we've shown a reduction across most of the cohorts of the 197 individuals that are managed within that cohort in terms of the fixed, flex and free cohorts that's there. We've got some figures around shoplifting and retail crime that's quoted there, and some figures between August 22 and the July this year. And we've already touched upon the fact that the Integrated Offender Management Support Scheme now manages retail crime offenders as well, which again helps to focus that police and partnership resources on those most persistent offenders. And that work started already in terms of dealing with those individuals. The city centre problem-oriented policing plans, they're ongoing, and we do hope to provide updates in relation to the success of those plans. They won't just relate to retail crime, they'll relate to other issues that are affecting the city centre, notably antisocial behaviour, youth-related ASB, and drug taking and drug dealing activity as well, which is something that we are looking at this moment in time. And again, the final update there in relation to the city centre PSPO consultation, which will be implemented on the 7th of November this year. So that is the presentation, Chair. We've attached a glossary of terms there as well, but hopefully in my explanation I've tried to explain what those are as I've gone through. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for the report. I know you've started to address some of the questions in your report, but I'm sure our panel will have additional questions as well following the presentation. So if I go through the first few questions, which are actually mine, trying to understand where we were with the written presentation we received before, but I think you've answered that. So we've got the time frame, so I'll take that question off. And also you've answered the acquisitive crime as well. You have defined the terms flex and free call heart. I think my understanding of it I've grasped, but I'm not just want to check with the panel if they're happy with that understanding as well. Yeah, okay. So then if I move to the following question, which is from David Nevitt, Councillor David Nevitt.
Not guilty. Thank you, Chair. Point 5 mentions a 29% increase on the previous 12-month period on retail crime. How accurate do you think these statistic is in view of the number of shoplifting incidents that are not reported? And do you think that the impact of the cost of living has seen more individuals result to shoplifting? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So, how accurate do we think it is? I mean, I think what we tend to look at in the police service around trends, if an area has a lower volume of offences than elsewhere, you tend to look at that and think, well, actually, we've got a confidence issue and people are not reporting to us. I think the spike we are seeing showing that there's certainly an appetite to report incidents to us by retailers. I think, to be fair, probably many of them are fed up with what's been happening, so are actively reporting incidents through to us and telling what's happened so that we can deal with it. Of course, with any crime type, you don't know what you don't know. So there is always the potential for retailers to not pass incidents through to us. I think we feel relatively comfortable that in the main we're seeing the full picture, and I think it helps because it's always supported by CCTV. We're starting to talk a lot more about it. We've engaged people like the Chamber of Commerce who've obviously expressed their concerns about the rise in it. And I think, frankly, there's a national debate around it, isn't there? The Home Secretary herself, a few short weeks ago, was talking about the importance of dealing with retail crime. So I'm hopeful that we are starting to get the full picture, but you can never be 100% satisfied that you've done all you can in terms of that confidence. In terms of the cost of living crisis, I've no doubt that it does impact on it. It's not the single driver for all shoplifting offences, and I think there's a real difference between some of the individuals that commit the offences. Some of that is driven out of a need for to fund a substance misuse habit, and that's actually been the case, I think, for a lot of acquisitive crime for a number of decades. I think what we're seeing at the moment, though, is that there is more of an appetite, I think, generally for people to purchase items cheaper. So it's not these aren't always individuals are stealing items from shops to use themselves, but there is a market out there for cheaper goods that happen to have been stolen. And I think that probably speaks more to the impact of the cost of living crisis on this increase in shoplifting. Is a bit of a network developing. 20 odd years ago, you used to be able to go to certain pubs in towns or city centres where you could buy stolen coffee or bacon. They were the things that were always taken. It's not like that now. Or toiletries, food products are being stolen and are on a market that thrives through some of our communities with people happy to buy it without asking questions. I think that's really the tipping point in terms of the cost of living crisis.
Okay, you got a follow-up question?
Can I just follow that up with I appreciate what you're saying, but the thing is, if the retailers send information, CCTV and the evidence you require, and nothing comes from it, what incentive is there for them to report it? And why, is that one of the reasons why people are not reporting it? Because that seems to be the feeling on the shop floor.
Yeah, I think it's a long-standing issue with any crime type, is that people don't have confidence that anything happens. They're not going to tell us about it because they quite literally shrug their shoulders and say, "What's the point?" And that's for us to work harder and try and instill that confidence. We have a new communications officer, for example, that's allocated to our district, who's worked is a former journalist, worked locally for a number of years as a journalist. I think he understands well what pricks the interest of the public, and we're already starting to push things out on our channels, showing that we are actively dealing with these sort of issues, that we are making arrests and charging people, that they're going to court. And the role of the neighbourhood team, this is the very purpose of putting some extra staff in there, is to give them more capacity to engage better with the retailers and have those face-to-face conversations, give them the reassurance that we're dealing with it. We are out there in the town centre. One of my staff was actually in Frenchgate yesterday afternoon and saw an individual who is well known for shoplifting and challenged them. They hadn't actually committed an offence at that particular point in time, as it transpires. But such is the nature of some of these individuals that they saw the officer who went to speak to them and subsequently picked up a chair and threw it at them. Fortunately, not seriously injured. But we are out there engaging with these individuals, and the retailers in that particular area would have seen that we were there challenging some of these people and dealing with them. And I think it's important we do that and we step more into that space where perhaps some of the security staff and retailers themselves have feel that they're an awful day at work where they're having to challenge a shoplifter, instead of running away, then threatens them. So we need to take more ownership of that.
Okay, thank you. Next question's from myself. I know we touched about it when we were talking about the different cohorts, but just be good to have a bit further detail about what support there is for first-time offenders and those struggling due to the cost of living crisis to prevent them from reoffending and being able to afford those everyday essentials.
I'll take this one, Chair, if I may. So in terms of first-time offenders, we know that's an important time in somebody's life, because there's an opportunity really to change their offending behaviour. We're not talking about somebody who has become a professional criminal and prolific. We're talking about somebody who potentially wants some help and support. So that's a real opportunity to engage and develop that support. So probation service offer support around the individual. So first-time offenders of probation service would receive support depending on the nature of their sentence. So it could be a community order, not necessarily a custodial sentence. And then there's a one-to-one engagement with that probation officer. In addition to that, when offenders come into the custody suite, again, it's recognised that the first-time offenders may not have been arrested before. So there is support available through the custody suite as well, where they can talk to a professional individual about what their offending behaviour is about, what other support's available, what's going on in their life. Is it something linked to cost of living? Is it something linked to something else? So that support can be tailored according to what those needs are. And in terms of people's motivation for committing crime, there will be people out there who are genuinely struggling. We know that. We see that every day. And there's a wide-ranging partnership available around things like food banks and the faith sector as well. And also people, as Ian said, may be committing crime to fund a habit or some kind of substance misuse, something like that. And again, you know, Aspire and partners that we work with, there's a lot of help and support available for people that require that help. Some will engage, some we have to keep going back to and re-engage, and powers of persuasion, etc. But eventually, you know, we don't give up on people. We want to try and make sure that all the help available is offered as possible. So in our response to that question, there's quite a few lists there of various partners that work, not just in the city centre, but across the borough, and that support's available. Because for me, it's really, really important. If you can stop people reoffending and committing crime, that is an important issue for us, and really helps people get back onto a stable path again.
Thank you. Okay, I'll move on to the next question. That's from Councillor Amy Dixon.
Hiya. So point 20 states that retail harassment type offences saw a 41% increase. It also notes that there's been a 43% increase in both fear or provocation of violence and causing intentional harassment or distress offences. Could you confirm for me how many of these cases were in the city centre, and whether there are any specific links being any cases, any link to our shopping centre and the interchange where security personnel have struggled to deal with the issues being experienced for some time?
Unfortunately, I think our partnership analyst is away, so I don't have the specific percentage rate. But broadly speaking, I think you've probably identified that the majority of those still are in the city centre. 40-odd% of all of our shoplifting for the entire county or just in the town ward. It's the same around those kind of offences. There are links to Frenchgate and the interchange. That there have been for some time, as you've pointed out. But I do think that we have a much better response around that than maybe we did 2 years ago. We still hold sort of regular meetings across the partnership and with the management within the Frenchgate Centre. What we see now, I mean, certainly what we had a few years ago was the same groups of people causing real issues for public and for staff that work there. And actually, we've pretty much sorted most of that out. That what we have now, though, are different cohorts of different youths as they grow up that still are attracted to it. So it's like painting the first or fourth bridge, isn't it? You think you're finished and you have to go back to the beginning. But we still have that commitment to it. I still think that we work hard to try and maintain those relationships with them. We have a new manager in the Frenchgate Centre that my neighbourhood's chief inspector and the neighbourhood's inspector has met with. I think we have a common understanding of what we can do. And so the example I've just given you a short while ago about what happened in the Frenchgate with one of my staff yesterday is an example that we are there working together. We've kind of run some knife arch operations within the centre. I think that there is more that we are trying to do, and there's more that we should be doing around retailers generally, though, in terms of advice as to what to do. As it happens, Dave Struggles, my chief inspector, is actually at a conference this morning where there are nationally senior police officers are discussing retail crime and about what good practice looks like. And there are some videos that are being created. I'm not aware they've been rolled out yet that give retailers and shop assistants advice on what to do with aggressive individuals. I think it's probably well publicised. There are certain national companies that have been really clear saying their staff will not challenge shoplifters anymore. That's great in one respect, but ends up becoming counterproductive because shoplifters know that, so they target their stores and actually ends up kind of a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of offending. So we know we have more to do around it. There's a lot more we can do to support them. And I think what, specifically in Doncaster, the increase in staff and the joined up work with Bill's team means that I think we will be better equipped to start to see that spike flatten out and start to drop.
So I'm more concerned, I completely understand your shoplifting. I'm more concerned about their retail harassment. So it's like in the Frenchgate Centre particularly, you've got a woman in a shop who's then being harassed by youths who is shouting to another shop member, ring security. They are not bothered about security. They're going to run off. They're going to run rings round these security men. This doesn't seem, unless there's a police officer, there doesn't seem to be anything to deter them from doing this.
Yeah, and I think we do get some really unfortunate behaviours, don't you? And even when we've got a police officer, an individual's sort of seen them and thrown some street furniture at them. It's always a challenge to have that. We frankly, it's difficult for us to have a police officer permanently in something like the Frenchgate Centre, and they obviously pay for security, and it's part of our role is to work with them, give them confidence, and help them develop some of their skills around dealing with conflict. I think actually they've had a change of personnel relatively recently, actually with some of their security staff, which I think is a positive. So you're right. There are some who are not affected by the presence of security or indeed police officers, but just give the assurance that we do work with them, and it's part of our continuing patrol plan with those additional staff going into the city centre neighbourhood team.
Councillor Steve Cox.
Thank you. At first, thank you for the presentation. It's really good, and it's nice to listen to hear that things are actually moving forward, and that's great. My question, I'm not going to read it all out, but what it is yes, we're hearing about Frenchgate Centre and the support that security within the Frenchgate Centre are getting. What about premises outside the Frenchgate Centre? Unfortunately, I mean, I was in a shop in Wheatley 2 weeks ago, and that had a shoplifter in it. It was sat on the tins of beer opening the tins of beer and drinking them. He won't go in anywhere, he just couldn't drink them all. And the staff in there, like Amy's just pointed out, the staff were absolutely flaming terrified. So I'd stopped with woman on till, she were there, and then somebody else got him out. But then as we were leaving, police were coming up. So your reaction times to these things, are they, do you believe that they're good enough, are they fast enough? And again, what support is given to premises outside? I mean, that involves marketplace, we know the thefts go off at marketplace. We know that it's all happening there. But yeah, I'll let you answer that, sorry.
No, thank you, Councillor. No, a really important point, and I wouldn't want anybody to think this is all about the city centre to the detriment of elsewhere. We're just bringing a bit of focus at the moment because, frankly, we'll get more bang for our buck initially. Is if 40% of those offences are in such a really tight geographical area, it makes sense for us to bring some real focus to that. But that doesn't mean that we're not still dealing and supporting those retailers and dealing with those offences elsewhere in the borough. We still have neighbourhood teams that cover those areas. They are sized proportionately according to their demand. And I think some of that work that I've sort of alluded to around the national picture around policing and retail crime, the retail crime coordination team that we're putting together that help join those dots, and the rollout of things like the DAM system, CCTV upload system, will all help to support those things. In terms of our response to those incidents, I think frankly it depends on what sort of other demands we have, and that's been the unfortunate reality for retailers, and I absolutely empathise with them when sometimes they may feel that we take a bit long to get there. If I were to tell you that from sort of the middle of the evening last night to the early hours this morning, we had 71 incidents overnight across the borough, that stretches us. And naturally, when calls for service go into the force control room, we have a process to try and prioritise them. Of course, we move resources around to respond to demands. And sometimes it's the devil's own work deciding where to put your resource first. And it literally does depend. You could pick up the phone asking for that set of circumstances, have someone within minutes, or frankly may unfortunately wait for an hour because there might be some other demand where there's a perceived greater risk to life or injury at that time. So it's something that we do talk about an awful lot. We have weekly reviews of our response times. What I can say is that gradually our response to 999 calls as a borough has gradually improved over the last sort of 2 years. We're still well within, on average, the 15 minutes response time that we give ourselves for a 999 call. Some of our priority calls that are not an emergency, that's still a challenge depending on the time of day or the day of the week.
Could I just add to that? Sorry, Steve. Just on the back of what Ian said there as well, I think some of the work in the city centre targeting some of the offender group will benefit other areas because there's no doubt at all these people are travelling and are committing crime, not just in the city centre, but also in some of the retail parks that's around the city centre and some of the local shops that you talk about as well. We know that from their offending behaviour. So there is a positive knock-on effect from that, which is good. In terms of local issues, local areas, I work very closely with Inspector Lisa Bird in the central area. Lisa covers the central area as well as the city centre. We've got a great rapport. All areas of Doncaster, that kind of approach is replicated between area managers, locality, leads, and also the local police. So if they examine and see a hotspot developing around a particular shop premises around, could be violent behaviour, it could be public order, it could be retail crime, they will take a problem-solving approach to that. And although the response is really important, for me equally important is the follow-up work around problem-solving. So there's an opportunity to work with that retail about what advice and support can we give you to help you develop better security, which is good, that's a positive. There's also an ability for the crime reduction officer, Eamon Larkin, who covers the entire borough. And I've seen Eamon go out to retail premises, provide advice, provide a report, completely free, which helps them to engage with their management sometimes, or senior management, and say, we need a bit of help here, need a bit of investment. So that, I think that's important as well. You're quite right. It's not just an issue affecting city centre. It's affecting many parts of the borough. We've got to take that problem-solving approach as well as responding to requests for help when they're required.
I think Councillor James Church wants to add a question. Is it on the follow-up? I know. If you want to go first.
With that, I mean, I think most people are aware we just live just outside town centre and facing a park, and we have reported crime over and over again within that area. I think in the last 2 weeks there's been a couple of robberies, a couple of drugs deals, but what is refreshing to hear is that you have noticed there is the same, or some of the same people that are doing the same things, because it got to a point where we could watch cars being burgled, report that, and then you'd know that they'd got arrested because it stopped for a period of time, and then you knew when they were out because it started again, and you could see that pattern. But it's great that you've noted that. But what we also see sometimes is when enforcement's heavy within town, it pushes that out. So when everything's dropping off in town, they're going out to a place where the criminals think there's no here because focusing on that. So I'm understanding it a lot more than I did. But thank you. But don't forget about outside centre.
Just a couple of points. Is there any connection with the work being done in the city centre to disrupt shoplifting and an increase with wards that are close to the city centre? And in terms of the PSPO, 86 fixed penalties over 3 years is less than 2 a month. Is that reassuring to the public?
Well, I can certainly cover the point around displacement of crime. The activity in the city centre has just started, so we are going to monitor that. I think it's really important to do that from the points that's been made already. There's no data that tells us that's happening, but we're aware that offenders will look for easy targets. If they feel as though they're being targeted in one area, they may move to another. We are well aware of that, and the lucky thing for us, the good thing for us, is that Inspector Bird covers the central area. So in terms of, we've got the donut of the city centre plus the outer area. Lisa is the inspector that is responsible for that area. So Lisa can work closely with partners to make sure that we're in tune with that. And I know that Ian has lots of meetings and mechanisms to monitor that on a daily, weekly basis in terms of what that displacement is. And there's obviously an ability for the police to deploy resources. In terms of the PSPO and the fixed penalty data, I touched on that in the presentation about people may look at that and feel it's low. However, the PSPO is not just about the enforcement side of things, it's about the engagement. However, to be fair, Councillor, what we are seeing more recently is that behaviours have changed slightly with the PSPO, and individuals are becoming a bit more aggressive and more confrontational with our staff as well, and with members of the public. So therefore, the additional resources that Ian's talked about is going to help us to look at those behaviours and tackle them in a different way. And actually, I think with some of the individuals, unfortunately, the route of enforcement is there's a route that's left, because their behaviours are at such a level that it's not to be tolerated in that city centre. It's not something that I want to stand for. You know, if you see aggressive behaviour taking place, whether that's between individuals or against members of the public, that's not something we want to tolerate in the city centre. So having the police there to support us, having a camera network to monitor things, having a great reporting mechanism with businesses and partners to tell us where the issues are, then that enables us to take that problem-solving approach. And one of the things we're looking at is looking at building up some chronologies on individuals, because we're seeing the same couple of names appearing every time, causing behaviours in different parts of the city centre. And this is the same for other areas in Doncaster, not just in the city centre. So those chronologies help us to build that offending behaviour, which allows us to look at other outlets and other disposal mechanisms. And sometimes it could be a criminal behaviour order. We've got to present the evidence to a court to get a criminal behaviour order, but that can lead to a different sanction. So it could lead to somebody being banned, for example, from a particular area. So that's something we're looking at the moment, because you're right, some of the behaviours are escalating, but having the police with us, supporting us, is really good news. I think good news for our staff, good news for the public, and I think we'll start to see some real positive benefits from that, which hopefully we'll be able to update on in the future.
Okay. Councillor Steve Cox, you have another question?
Can you share more of what is planned for National Safer Business Action Week on the 16th of October 23? A lot of feedback received about the following up support from the police. Will this information be shared during the week of action? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I can share bits of it. We've got a series of arrests, which is a primary part of our week of action that I can't disclose an awful lot about at this stage. But you'll see a number of arrests during that week of individuals that impact on the centre, in particular, some of these retail crime issues that we've spoken about. So we will have some additional resource from around the county that will support our district during that week for that particular operation. And naturally, we'll be running engagement with retailers during that week. And part of the purpose of Dave Struggles being in Leicester today to speak with colleagues nationally about best practice to bring some of that back for part of that engagement. So that learning out of that will be shared. And so what we'd expect to see is retailers engaged with by our staff. With relationship building is an important part of all of this. And I think the important thing, when you have national awareness weeks, it mustn't just be a flash in the pan. It can't be what happens in that week, because this has to be about daily business. And to be fair, Council, that's why I was keen to perhaps talk about what happened on Friday of last week when we've arrested 4 suspects. That's what we do, or at least we need to be doing every day and every week, is arresting people. It can't be crammed into one week and then forgotten about. So I think the important part of that week is about some awareness raising. We will have some products and some advice for retailers, show people that we're talking about it, but it needs to be a launch pad for a way of working.
Councillor Nigel Cannings, I know you've got a question that may have been answered in the presentation. Do you still want to ask this?
Can you tell us more about the Doncaster's IOM scheme and the city centre pop plant?
Thank you, Councillor. So IOM is it's a national framework that means that statutory partners work together to deal with, really, it's about the rehabilitation of offenders. And the important thing is if a suspect is arrested, charged, and ends up going through a court process, whatever the outcome of that court process, opportunities for a bit of wraparound and to try and break that cycle of offending. So as I think we've responded in the questions, there are different types of cohorts, and I think that we have good ways of working here in Doncaster with probation to make sure that we're addressing different types of offending. Domestic abuse is one such category within integrated offender management. We try and break that cycle of offending. The cohorts, we've got dedicated police officers that work alongside probation to work with them, and we look to use lots of different means of breaking that cycle. It sometimes might be housing, it might be substance misuse. Some of the individuals that come into them have got some challenging circumstances, and there's no quick fix, and some of it is embedded behaviour. Individuals are in their 30s and 40s, that's difficult to break that cycle of offending. But that's what the process is all about, and there is often an opportunity and a means of recalling people to prison quicker through that integrated offender management structure, so that if people don't really show changes in behaviour, they're returned to custody. That does step out. That's for those that have gone through court process, but for those that are first time offending, we touched on it earlier, there's still options around cautions and the work that we do in custody to divert people through to different support networks. So there's kind of a 2-tier approach to it. In terms of the POP plans, these are our problem-solving plans that our neighbourhood staff are specifically trained in trying to look at the causes for particular crime in an area or specific premises. We often now refer to sort of POP light, as we call it, so short-term problem-solving issues. So it might relate to a single premise, it might be about the layout of the premises that actually attract shoplifters. So I think Councillor Cox's analogy about the individual sat on the cans of beer, you often see that alcohol is kept near the exit of premises or toiletries kept near the exit of premises. Well, that's almost inviting people to commit a quick theft shoplifting. So with our design out crime officers, we go and give retailers good advice and try to understand what it is that's creating the crime in that particular area. So we'll run a number of problem-solving plans at any one time. Some might be a quick hit for a couple of weeks. Some might be long-term plans that are in place for 6-7 months.
Okay, has anyone in the panel got, or like councillor's got another question? Yes, David Levitt.
Thank you, Chair. Can you just go back to the 173% increase in business robberies? And you stated it was a 7% increase in this. Is this just another aspect of previous underreporting coming to sight, where businesses are insured and those sites that just take it on the chin? Industrial estates like the Kirksandall one are facing that increase, and I hear over the last few months these issues have been suffered.
Very, very possibly. Yeah, very, very possibly. It is where we've previously had underreporting, and I think inaccurate crime recording, frankly, is that we, as I was alluded to before, perhaps we've continued to record them as a shoplifting, and it might be the product is a can of deodorant, but actually the more serious element of that is the fact that the member of staff's been threatened or has been pushed past in order to commit that offence. So quite rightly, they're now being recorded as robberies. Quite rightly now as well, when we identify suspects, they might be charged with the theft, but they'll be charged with an associated offence. If the Crown Prosecution Service will allow it, we'd charge them with a robbery themselves, which is the kind of offence that would see, long custodial sentences rather than short-term sort of 5-week sentence you might get for a theft shoplifting. But even if we don't get permission to charge with robbery, we would look at other offences, assaults, or offences under the Public Order Act. So with these, we do try to maximise the use of the legislation. It has been a worrying trend. I think you saw on that green graph the increase over the last few months. That's what we need to really work on. I think with the approach that we're taking, we will start to slow down that increase. Let's be frank, we're not going to eradicate the world of acquisitive crime, but we must do better, I think, for our business community and the public that go to our shop premises, because it naturally impacts on our economy, doesn't it, if we don't have the confidence for people to go shopping.
I mean, yes, you've stated there about robberies from shoplifting, but I mean, it was the industrial estates that are suffering as well. Businesses, they take it on the chin and don't say anything. So that's the aspect of underreporting.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor, I'm not deliberately ignoring that. I thought I've just missed that. So, no, you're right. We do see that, and we do see thefts on sort of retail sort of industrial premises. We've done some work, for example, with the iPort, where they've had a string of offences where they were being targeted overnight. We've again sent sort of staff to go and look at how they can continue to improve their security and improve the reporting. And I've mentioned a few times I've sort of been up in front of the chamber. That's exactly the message I've given those. I went with the PCC, been to the PCC to a couple of events where we are trying to encourage that and develop that relationship with the business communities per se. And I think it's well received, the message that we are giving them, and hopefully we're starting to build that confidence for them to report to us, so that they don't take it on the chin and just think, well, police won't do anything anyway. That's what we need to turn that attitude around, don't we?
Okay, any additional questions? Okay, just want to make a point. I know we're going to ask if we will accept the the report and the additional information that's come from the presentation today. Just want to make a note on the typo as well before we accept. I think you're aware from the date of going through cabinet.
Yes, I've amended that, Chair, and it's entirely my fault. I've got to hold my hand up to that.
No problem, at
Not
least you've got the
Rachel's.
clarification. Thank you. So is our panel happy to accept the report and the further information that's come from today's panel? Okay, thank you very much. So I'll thank Bill, Ian and Rachel for coming along today. I know Dan will be staying for the next part. I'll just allow for a minute for you to leave and for the next report to come through. Can I just remind the audio is still rolling and now we have got camera images as well. So if we start on to the next report, which is the Local Flood Risk Management Strategy 2023 to 2029. I know Dan's stayed with us, so I won't ask Dan to introduce himself, but I know, Richard, you have joined us. Would you like to introduce yourself to the panel?
Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Richard Campbell and I'm the Senior Engineer within the Flood Risk Management team. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have received the report, so I know there are some follow-up questions regarding the report. Or do you want to add something, Richard? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to do a bit of an overview, a bit of an introduction to the strategy, if that would be helpful.
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you, Richard.
Brilliant, thank you. Sorry, would you like to introduce yourself first, Dan, or are you happy to carry on?
I'll do it again, but Dan Swain, Director... It's all right, no, Dan Swain, Director for Police, Doncaster City Council, but obviously I've had some experience directly of the floods, not in 2019, but certainly subsequently, so it's certainly a topic that's very prominent and one that we're very interested in, and it's very significant, and also usually one that occurs around about this, or starts around about this time in terms of the rainfall, sadly, or just after Christmas, usually in February.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, so in terms of the City of Doncaster Council is designated as a lead local flood authority. And what that means is we have a raft of statutory duties and legal responsibilities, and one of which is relating to flood risk, and one of which is the Local Flood Risk Management Strategy, which is the purpose of our discussion today. And that is under Section 9 of the Flood and Water Management Act. We do have a live strategy at the moment. I think that's been pointed out previously. This was approved in 2014. But this strategy, we felt, contained a lot of out-of-date information, including things like climate change projections, flood risk bands and historic flooding. We think the existing strategy was very useful in terms of reflecting the flooding that we had in 2007. I'm not sure if any of you will remember that flood in 2007. It was quite devastating for the City of Doncaster. So the main drivers for updating the strategy was to incorporate the new flooding information that was presented in 2019. Some of you was around for that. We felt that we gained a lot of information from 2019. It was quite devastating for us, and we learnt a lot of information, and we wanted to incorporate that into the new strategy. We wanted to include new national guidance in terms of climate change epochs into our new strategy. As I touched on before, climate change projections get updated every couple of years, and our current strategy from 2014 is nearly 10 years out of date. So what we wanted to do is bring it in line with existing policy. And what we wanted to do finally was to account for emerging legislation, and that is something I'll touch on later in this report. So the new strategy, it aims to update our understanding of flood risk. As I touched on earlier, the 2019 event and subsequent events have been really informative for us, and this is something we wanted to incorporate into our new strategy. We wanted to align better with national and local policy, and we wanted to prepare the transition to becoming a sustainable drainage systems approval body, and that was the emerging legislation that I discussed earlier. We're going to have new responsibilities next year. We felt it was quite important to have the council policy reflect that new burden next year. Another key driver for change was the lead local flood authority was subject to an internal audit last year, and one of those recommendations was to refresh the local flood risk management strategy, and that was based on some of the items I've touched on earlier. So the objectives set out in the strategy are very citizen focused. We try and demonstrate our commitment to improving local flood risk for local communities. The objectives are intended to be measurable and set out a clear path to improving knowledge, resilience and flood risk in Doncaster. And finally, we'll touch on consultation a little bit later in one of the questions, but we did go out to public consultation for 4 weeks. So that's my introduction, Chair. I'm happy to go over to questions, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor James Church.
I think Richard's covered it quite well, actually, in his introduction. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from myself. Can we have the update on the outcome of the consultation exercise following the briefing with the panel on the public engagement prior to this meeting?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. I think this is a really good question, so thank you very much for that. So in terms of consultation, we took a two-tier approach on this. The first approach was to send the strategy to our partner organisations, so the Environment Agency, our neighbouring authorities, the internal drainage boards and things like that. So what we wanted to do with that was we'll send it over to them for comment to make sure it's factually correct and to make sure everything in there was in keeping with the national strategy. And we got some really good comments and we amended the strategy based on that. And then we proceeded to the public consultation. What we wanted to do is make sure when the document went to public consultation, it was the best document it can be, and then that would be reflected in the comments that we received from our partner organisations. So the general consultation was live for 4 weeks. That was between the 14th of July and the 14th of August. We liaised with our communications team to make sure it met the biggest audience that it could. It was advertised in the borough-wide newsletter named Your Life Doncaster, which was sent to over 96,000 registered email addresses. So I think we got a good batch there. And we know it was opened at least 50,000 times. It was also uploaded to the consultations page, the standard page that we have on the authority. It was also uploaded to our flood risk management landing page, and that was viewed at least 300 times. But also with those channels that I've just discussed, we would discuss it with partners, developers, as word of mouth as well. We were spreading awareness at every opportunity. Sometimes when we'd have a disagreement with a developer about standards and policy, we would just earmark them and say, if you go to this strategy, you can comment on that to see whether your comments can be taken into account to make it a bit more fairer and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just would like a bit more information, like how many responses you have from the public in the end in the consultation.
Certainly, thank you. Disappointingly, we only received 20 responses in the end. We don't know whether that is a reflection on how well it was received by the public. Most of them was quite positive. A lot of them referred to blocked gullies and things like that, so it wasn't really focused on the strategy. So we know that blocked gullies is an issue for the community, so we was expecting some of our responses to reflect that.
I'm sorry, and just to follow up, was there much engagement with like particularly areas we know that are like prone to flooding, such as like Bentley? Was there any outreach engagement on the proposals on this?
There was with our established flood wardens in the Fish Lake community. They seem to be our big community that was affected. They're a really organised group, and we shared with them, we reached out to them to let them know that we are setting out our strategy on how we're going to manage flood risk in the future, and we invited them and any other resident that we spoke to in the meantime to invite them to comment on our proposals. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I think that goes nicely to the next question, which I think that's from Councillor Steve Cox.
Well done. How is CDC I mean, we are a town, but sorry, fraudulent slip, but promoting flood warden volunteer scheme. How many flood wardens are there across the borough?
Thank you, Councillor. I think it's worth noting that the emergency planning team are the team that lead on recruiting flood wardens, but I did manage to speak to them in advance of this meeting, so I can give you some useful information. From my understanding, we started recruiting flood wardens in 2007, following the flooding that I earlier referred to across the city. But unfortunately, some of that engagement has dropped off since then, which is not unusual. Sometimes we get these communities that are impacted by flooding, and they tend to leave that area with all the mental stress and the physical impacts of the flooding and things like that. But I'm pleased to say that we have picked that back up with the Environment Agency. About 2 years ago, we started a new initiative to try and drive more recruitment for flood wardens. But unfortunately, due to other service pressures, that has been a slow start. But in answer to your question, we think we've got around 50 flood wardens across the borough, or the city, I should say. And as I touched on earlier, we think the majority of them are in the Fish Lake community. So there are little pockets around the borough that we'd like to congratulate on being really good flood wardens, and we'd like to improve that in the future.
And then I have another question, if that's all right, Chair, after this follow-up. Thank you. I volunteered to do this, as well as doing snow warden thing, because I have a vehicle that will get through most things. And I was told I couldn't. I think I've been told as well that I couldn't do it because of insurance. I have public liability insurance through a building company that we have, so it would be covered. How many people did actually contact, both for flood wardens and snow wardens, to volunteer? And how many people that contacted to volunteer were accepted to be able to volunteer?
Thank you. I think that's a really good question. In terms of snow wardens, I obviously can't comment on that. I apologise for that. But in terms of flood wardens that have approached us, I believe the number is only 2. We've got a couple in Sprotborough that contacted us and invited themselves to be flood wardens. And I believe we gave the relevant training. We have got an introduction pack. I'm not sure why you was rejected in the first place. I can certainly pick that up outside of this meeting if that would be helpful for you, Councillor. But it's unusual. I've not heard of that before. I've not come across that incident before, particularly with the insurance. I've worked at a few authorities dealing with flood warners and recruiting them, and insurance has never been something that's come to my mind. So, but we can certainly pick that up outside of this meeting if that's okay. Thank you.
I know Dan wants to add.
Just to make an observation, having been involved in trying to recruit flood wardens and also dealing with flood wardens in a live incident, it's fair to say that some communities, I think, are in a position where they are able to be more mobile. They may be retired, they may be part-time working, they may work remotely. Some communities, perhaps nearer and more urban, it's a bit more of a challenge because of the lifestyle. They may not have the capacity, they may not have the time, they may not have the inkling. So I think there's a bit of a job of work to do in building those areas that don't have them. It has been a struggle. And one of the challenges with flooding is it doesn't happen all the time. So when it does happen, it becomes more prominent in people's minds, and then at that point they're more willing to be involved. But then when it drops off a little, and I think that's probably an indication of some of the feedback on the strategy, it becomes less of an issue and less prominent in people's minds until it comes back round again. So I do think there's a job of work to be done about encouraging and incentivising people to do it. On the insurance issue, I can pick that up, that's the point. But in fairness, one of the challenges that you've got when you get into an emergency situation, particularly around flooding, and I know this from being out in various places with the chief exec at 1, 2 in the morning, when we're dealing with flooding and the impact on residents, is to manage sometimes people's behaviour in an emergency situation, because the last thing you want in an emergency situation is to put yourself in a position where you can be dangerous. And I know that from personal experience, because when I've been out at some of the areas in Fish Lake, you can be very quickly to the level of a knee or a thigh when the water comes over some of the areas where it goes through, and then a vehicle can get stuck. So I think that's probably the intention, particularly in terms of personal vehicles. I know when me and Pat Hagan were out at Fish Lake in 2022, we approached some water which we decided not to go through. Residents decided to go through, and subsequently one of them did get stuck. So I just think there's sometimes a need, I think, to make sure that people are aware that actually you need to make sure you assess your behaviour in those situations as well, because you can put yourself in danger. But the human nature is to try and help. I think that's one of the main drivers. So I do think we've got a bit of a job of work to do on encouraging people who are perhaps less able because of their circumstances to get involved in the volunteers. And I just also want to say on the strategy, I think the strategy is a necessary piece that we've got to have. But actually, what we need to communicate well to residents is some of the preparedness and the resilience. Because I would say since 2019, we've come quite a long way. Now, I don't want to be quoted on that to say, well, you said it wouldn't happen again. Because as the strategy indicates, flood risk is about probability and consequence. And actually, 2022, the level of water and the level and the height of the rivers were actually higher in some places than 2019, but yet didn't top out. So that gives you some idea of either is that uniqueness or is it some of the work that's been done. I think it's probably a little bit mixture of both. And what I have learnt over the years from flooding, because I was involved in 2007, but not here, somewhere else, is that no two instances are ever the same. And what I did want to stress as well is there's been an awful lot of work done since 2019, particularly in relation to the relationship, I think, with the EA, which I think has got better. We've also looked at levels of investment that we can make, with a commitment from this authority to a capital investment, several £1 million for a scheme in Bentley, in the absence of overall considered, approach from government to give us funding. That's not a political comment, but it is a reality. There isn't necessarily the money available to deal with some of these things. Significant amount of works at Fish Lake, significant amount of works planned in Conisbrough and around Duftons. So I think what that evidence is the authority has not only got a strategy, because the strategy is fine, but what's actually important is what you're doing. And also an awful lot of work on resilience. We're much more switched on. We've got the monitoring stuff now. As soon as it starts raining, Damien and me are on the phone. Where are we going at? What's it looking like? And also, that relationship with the AA, I think, has been quite useful, because I have found over the years, and I don't want to make a public criticism of an external organisation, but if we rely on forecasts and we rely on anticipation, sometimes somebody needs to make a judgment at a particular point in time. Otherwise, we've relied on it too much, and before we know what, we're in a difficult position. So the challenge is sometimes, is it going to go? Is it not going to go? Do we need to decant? Do we need to shut roads, etc.? And I think that relationship has certainly matured. And I spent a lot of time in some of these communities, particularly I've been involved in Fish Lake and at Conisbrough. And I would say that some of the confidence has certainly grown amongst residents. What I would also say is, in an emergency situation, we can't get it right all the time. We have had problems previously with the deployment of sandbags and then the return of sandbags. But to be honest, I'd rather get the criticism for, you didn't get the sandbags back than we didn't get the sandbags out. So I think we're getting better. The main challenge for me is that, given the significant environmental changes, I don't think this is something that's going to go away for us as an area. And I think longer term, we do need to think about, 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, because if global warming or increased rainfall continues, then we have got a problem, because we're a low level and we have a major arterial river and several others going through.
Okay, thank you. Can I just follow up on this one? I know you mentioned just briefly there, Dan, quite detailed, but you mentioned about sometimes when residents get involved, it can be problematic. I know when if you're doing a flood on screen, is there what training do they get? And obviously it goes back to training, when can you take that risk and whatnot, and that might be a good...
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because the training is important. I know from personal experience, when I was involved in the 2022, kind of getting told by emergency planning colleagues, actually you shouldn't really be there, you need to be very careful where you're going. And the flood warning training is to give them that confidence and to give them that relevant training, because things like getting people out of houses when they're flooded and decanting people, that's jobs for the blue lights, in essence, not for flood wardens. Deployment of sandbags, etc. So what I think would be really useful is if we work together, and I'll work with comms colleagues, because I have been made aware previously that we've got volunteers in certain areas, but I'll go back to the point, in other areas, lifestyles and opportunities are less for these people to engage in voluntary activity. So I really think we've got a piece of work to do on that.
Just to make note on that, we do have some active resident groups, and I know they have volunteered to do stuff before, and it may be worth tapping into them through our communities team as well. Okay, I don't know, is it coming back on the flood wardens, Councillor Cox? Or is it your additional question? Okay.
Yeah, I was involved in 2007 once. I drove a taxi. My sons at that time, his nursery, were shut because all buses were going to stop. The staff there couldn't get home, and it were Bentley, Scorthorpe, Highfields, Adwick, all where there were no transport. And I was taking them home and coming back and picking some more up and taking them home and coming back. I could see how it working because I've been out driving all day, and it were absolutely horrendous. And the people were absolutely, they were terrified. Because then obviously you could drive up through Scorthorpe, and you look left and right, and all you can see is water. And it's never been seen before. But what we found were that a lot of it was maintenance of the drainage either through surface water not being managed properly. There were a lot of those things going. So as far as, you know, driving in those conditions, I've driven in those conditions before. But it was exactly as you pointed out, Dan. Volunteered to take sandbags. My truck can carry 2 tons, and that was exactly what it to do. If to go to Northbridge, load it up, I'll take him to Fish Lake, come back and get some more. And I mean, we'll take you up our site meeting, but to be quite honest, I mean, I grew up in Stainforth. Fish Lake, you can see it. And these are people that we knew from school that wanted some support. And to be shot just for asking, were quite upsetting. But anyway, we'll take that later. And thank you, Chair, for giving me a chance to say that. As far as the strategy, will the strategy be going into the local plan as part of it as a whole? And I mean, on planning, I think most people know that I bang on and on and on about surface water. And surface water that will go into Torn, that will go into lots of different places. When we see an application come in, when you discuss water and its drainage, it's just within that red line boundary. We know that there are other applications going on more and more and more upstream. So all of that accumulative amount of water is going into the Torn or any other river. But then when the farmers, landowners aren't looking after their ditches, that's where it backs back up. But when it's all cumulative and going into an area, which it says within your strategy about Oakley and areas around there, we know that there are areas that do get it, but they don't come within some of the local plan information. So will that be updating the local plan?
Thank you, Councillor. I think that's a really good question. We would like to see it form part of the local plan, because when we have issues with developers building over land, as you quite rightly say, and potentially changing or influence, not causing flood risk, but changing the way rivers act, and particularly surface water and things like that, we need to make sure our local flood risk management strategy is embedded within the local plan. So we can object with confidence, I guess, and make sure we've got some teeth in our policy to make sure they do the best that they can for their sites. You're quite right when you point about the red line boundary. Sometimes it's hyper-focused on that red line boundary, when really we should be looking, as we usually do, outside that red line boundary and seeing what happens within that overall catchment. So yes, this is a short answer.
I mean, we did have one example on First Avenue in Finley, where there is flooding about a metre from where the red line boundary finished. We took that into account. I mean, being ward member as well, you know what's been going on for a long time around there. We were told not to look at that because it's outside the red line boundary. It floods. You've got people that are going to go to work. I mean, I think my comment, where are they going to get there in a canoe? But, you know, it's madness where we've got all this, and it's not just in our ward, it's in every single one it affects. But it'd be absolutely brilliant if you can get into local plan, like you say, to use that with confidence.
Thank you. Yeah, I completely agree with that. But one thing I would worth noting, that in terms of looking at planning applications, our internal drainage team, we do look at planning applications. And in terms of causing some flood risk outside that red line boundary, there's already established national policy called the National Planning Policy Framework that prevents causing flood risk off that site. So it's well established anyway, but what we want to do is make sure it's locally driven and there's a lot of focus on it locally. Thank you.
Councillor David Nevitt, I know you have a couple of questions.
Thank you, Chair. How well do you think City of Doncaster Council is prepared for a potential future flood risk similar to 2019?
Thank you, Councillor. As Dan alluded to earlier, I think we're better prepared now than we were in 2019. The reason I say that is we're better resourced now. We've got a bigger team now. So when it comes to responding to events, we can bring in officers at really short notice. We don't have to rely on bringing in contractors, external officers and things like that. We've got a lot more better information now. The 2019 gave us a lot of information to incorporate into our investment programme that Dan's also alluded to earlier. We kind of know where our hotspots are at the moment. So when we talk about Conisbrough and we talk about Bentley and Fishlake, we kind of know where the flooding is going to occur now. Although two flooding events are not always the same, we had a different mechanism in 2007 than we did in 2019. But we've built a really good picture now. And in the background, we're doing a lot of information gathering. We're talking to residents a lot more. And we're 4 years down the line since that flooding occurred. So we've done a lot of work in the background that's not necessarily reflected in this report, but we're certainly better off now. And also, we have a 24-hour call-out service through the winter months for a flood risk officer to monitor the weather. And if we do receive a weather warning, we do monitor river levels and surface water and where we think the cloud bursts are going to be. And finally on that, I think we demonstrated how prepared we are. In 2022, we had an event in February last year, which was considered a near miss. But during that event, we coordinated delivering sandbags, directing tankers to remove water from carriageways and things like that in advance of the storm. And we had very little impact of flooding. We had carriageway flooding, but we didn't have any internal property flooding. I think that was a good demonstration to say, a dry run really, that we are prepared and better prepared now than we was in 2019.
Yes, I have noticed that we as councillors are getting sort of weather forecasts which show amber, yellow and red alerts, which is great that we're getting that understanding before anything can happen. So how is the situation being monitored, and are you able to identify potential areas that may get flooded in the future? Like you say, a cloudburst happening in one area may not affect another, but also if an area gets flooded from, say, that rainfall, how will it affect other communities upstream and downstream as well?
Thank you. I think there's 2 points worth noting on that one. As I just suggested, when we do receive a weather warning, we proactively inspect a list of critical assets. And when I talk about critical assets, I'm talking about trash screens, I'm talking about road gullies and things like that. So if we do a cleanse of everything that's critical, we have a best chance of limiting the impact of the flooding moving forward. I think the second point is we are currently taking a proactive approach to managing flood risk. This is likely to be flooded in the future. And we're developing a pipeline of projects. We're not static, we're not focused too much on 2019. We are looking for new areas as well. We use a lot of national mapping that the Environment Agency hosts and update all the time. So whilst we've got our recovery programme that we're developing at the moment, we are looking in the future to proactively manage some of those flood risk areas. And we're hoping to deliver some schemes before the flood actually hits, so we don't have to have a recovery programme. We're having that proactively pipeline programme of projects. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to build on that, really. I think let's not forget that actually flooding is incredibly complicated, because water has a tendency to kind of go wherever it wants to go. Also, you need to remember that the Don is tidal, which creates a further challenge for us, because if you get a tidal surge back, then at some places further down it might be okay, but further up it's going over. So it's very important that we use the intelligence that we've got historically, but also the live data, for me, when I've been out and about, has been absolutely crucial. And being alert to that live data before it becomes too significant, so having the eyes and ears out. So the forward liaison officers that we have, quite often, when we get into the issue of we're expecting heavy rainfall, either flash flooding or continued, we'll get that intelligence, we'll get people out, and we'll start to think about what we're going to do and how we deploy things. But again, the point's been raised quite rightly. It's not just about reacting, it's also about planning in future. So the scheme at Bentley, the scheme at Conisbrough, the stuff that we've done in and around Fish Lake and Tickhill, you know, they're not the only schemes. There will be others going forward. But sometimes we get challenged as well as, well, why aren't you doing this scheme here and why aren't you doing it now? Well, actually, because if we do that there, there's a potential displacement elsewhere. And the other issue to remember is whatever comes out of here goes somewhere else. Because that's been one of the problems. And I've had a bit of a crash course in the technical learning around some of the flooding, because I've had conversations previously with the A colleagues and with drainage colleagues to say, well, why can't we just pump it out over there? And well, actually, if you do that, that's just going to flood a village a bit further down. So you're just exasperating the problem. But I think we've demonstrated since 2019 a significant shift, both in terms of technical capability, investment in the service, and also relationships within communities as well. You know, I think that's a key part, because the work of the volunteers is absolutely essential. And actually what you do find in situations like this is that communities generally rally together quite well. And I'm hoping that in future we're not going to get the level of problems that we had in 2019. But as I said, the weather and it just is something that we just need to monitor, but sadly we can't control.
Has a panel yet? Councillor James Church, you want to ask another question?
I've noticed myself over the last 18 months, obviously my ward, Bentley, I've noticed the relationships between the council and outside agencies, the EA and Yorkshire Water, and some of them schemes will be very welcome when they actually put in place. Particularly the one at Bentley, where I think it offers great value for money. I think I was amazed at the size of the scheme, but the amount of money that it was going to cost, I thought it would be far more. And I do feel it would give, when it eventually takes place, I think it will give the residents in that area reassurance, because obviously we worry as councillors and as an authority, but the people whose lives have ruined, I mean, they get 2 or 3 days of rain and they start panicking, and rightly so. And I hope the schemes come sooner rather than later, because with every passing winter, you know, the odds of it happening again are there. But I have seen what you were saying earlier on. I've seen that firsthand within my ward. So fingers crossed we get there sooner rather than later.
Any additional comments from panel or questions? From Dan or Richard, is there anything you want to ask finally? Okay. So we're looking at now the recommendations from the report. So we can review and agree today, or if you want to add anything in regards to, I know we had some questions about the approach to consultation, but I'm happy to, what do you think as a panel? Are you happy to accept? Or do you want to add any comments? Yep.
To recommend that it goes into and be part of local plan.
What do the rest of the panel think? See nods? Yep. Okay.
I think in terms of its status as a planning policy document, I think we probably need to take some advice, because there, as you know, within the NPPF prescribed by government, set within legislation, there's only certain things that can be given material weight from a planning perspective. So I think if your recommendation was that consideration be given to ensuring that the principles or objectives of the strategy are reflected within the local plan, that's fine. But I don't think you can, I'm conscious we might not be able to do what you request because the legal framework may not allow us to. So we can pick that up, but certainly, I mean, the reality is flood risk should be prominent and part of any planning application. Perhaps where we are hindered is in what the NPPF does and doesn't allow, which is the national policy framework. But I'm sure we can pick that up.
Okay, so shall we look to agree the report? Yes, but look and wait for Dan to come back to us as a panel to find out the local plan information. Is the committee panel, happy for that as well? Okay.
I wanted to also ask if I'm able to know if the panel supports the strategy based on the discussion today.
Panel, are we happy to? Yep. Okay, all right, thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Dan and Richard, for attending today and sharing information. Just need to now go back to the panel to go through our overview and scrutiny work plan. So if you can have a look at the information, and are you happy to agree for the future work plan?
Thank you. I'll just note that the next meeting is in December, and it will be looking at future park scheme and an update on street scene and possibly heat wave. That's just to be confirmed, and what format it takes in terms of being formal or a briefing session. And then further to today's update around retail crime, there'll be a full meeting of the Crime and Disorder Committee on the 15th of February, and one in between will bring an update on waste and recycling.
Okay. Any comments on the work plan? Okay, thank you for attending today, and I hope you get back safe. Thank you.